Welcome back to the Doyle D'Angelo Show. Of course, I am your host, Doyle D'Angelo. It's great to be back to talk about yesterday's games, which were pretty incredible. Well, we should say one of them was incredible. The other one was not so great, except for Knicks fans who should definitely be excited about the way that their team is playing right now. If we're being honest, this Knicks team looks to be on what could be a historic run. So, of course, we're not going to waste any time here. Um, of course, this game was sort of a tale of not two halves, but just the first quarter. Because you talk about those players who come in and win you championships, right? Of course, the Knicks won this game 144 to 114. But Deuce McBride, he's the guy who comes in off the bench and he hits four threes in a row. Four. And this happens in the first quarter. This puts them up 20-6. And you kind of get this sense that, okay, if the Sixers don't weather this storm early, they're going to get trounced. And that's exactly what happened. The Knicks come out, they score 25 points in 6 minutes, and they started the game 11 of 14 from three. They tie the NBA playoff record for most three pointers in a quarter. Shamit had two, Brunson had three. They tie the NBA playoff record for most threes and a half with 18. They have the most threes in a playoff game in Knicks history. 5 straight games shooting 50% plus, which is the most in 70 years in Knicks history. They had 25 total threes across the entire game, which is tied for the most in playoff history. And a 19.4 plus point differential, which is the highest entering the conference finals in NBA history. So when you kind of look at this team and you look at all of these different stats, something that is very striking is the fact that this team is shooting at such a high level that is even above the Golden State Warriors in anything that they've ever done, which is pretty incredible. Um, of course, you're not comparing them to the Golden State Warriors, but Mike Brown has them playing very, very well. Obviously, someone who knows the Warriors system pretty well knows how to work on shot mechanics, knows how to work on ball movement, the pick and roll, screen movement, all of these different things that the Knicks are doing exceptionally well on. They know how to leverage Brunson's ability to get into the lane. They know how to leverage Cat's ability to pass the ball, which is sort of the next thing here. We have really gotten the true Carl Anthony Towns experience here. Um, he was wheeling and dealing in the first half. And I think that there's a lot of power to having a passing big man or a big man who can distribute the ball well enough to the point where the rest of the offense can run around him. And you see that this is really benefiting someone like Mikal Bridges, who can run off the ball and get into the lane. You're seeing this benefit someone like Brunson, who doesn't always have to be the ball handler at all times. It allows Brunson to get to his spots and to get open off the ball. And if you kind of just looking at the production all around, you got 17 and 10 from Cat. Most of those 10 assists came in the first half. You had 22 points and 6 assists from Brunson, 25 from McBride, and that was off of 7 of 9 3-point shooting. You had 17 points and 9 rebounds for Josh Hart. Ultimately, they had 4 players that were a plus 30 or higher tonight, which is just absurd. So, whenever you have 3 or 4 players that are a plus 30 on the night, I mean, that's how you win. So, I think that ultimately this Knicks team is very dominant and they have before shown a lot of flashes. They've shown us their potential of what they could be, but this is the best that they've looked. And this could be an all time team by the time we're done with them, especially if they keep on scoring and playing defense the way that they have been. And looking at the Sixers, Embiid was incredible in this game. He had 19 points and didn't miss a shot in the first half. Actually, he didn't miss a shot in the entire game. They got solid production across the board from the entire team in the first half, shooting 51% from the field, but they gave up 81. So some of it was poor defensive rotation, some of it was poor defensive awareness, but the other half was extraordinary shot making by the Knicks. So, Embiid, he did not miss a shot for the entire game, scoring 24 points. But in the second half, the rest of the team didn't really perform well. So, that's just kind of how it goes. But ultimately, the Knicks are moving on. They're either going to face the Pistons or the Cavaliers. My guess is that they face the Pistons. That should be a really good series. It'd be a defensive series, very tight, barn burner type of series. And of course, the Thunder are waiting on the winner of the Spurs and the Wolves, which is the next game that we'll get into after we take a break. All right, back from the break, and it's time to talk about the Spurs and the Wolves. Now, the Wolves end up winning this game 114 to 109, but obviously the big storyline out of this game is the fact that Wembanyama gets ejected early in the second quarter. Of course, he got a flagrant foul too for elbowing Nas Reed in the neck and the lower jaw area. He was ejected for that. Of course, it was a close game. I think the Wolves, I think, were up by 4 at that point, if I can remember correctly. But if you're really looking at this play, Wembanyama, he was getting fouled on the play. It looks like he was trying to loosen himself from the defender, and when he did get loose, he basically throws an elbow, and he's kind of like spinning around and hits Reed just smack dab in the jaw and the neck. And I think the refs really tried to find a way to keep him in the game and to not eject the best player on the court, but it was too clear and obvious. It fit all of the I guess like it fit the checklist of what you would have in a flagrant foul too. So there's clear windup, there was clear follow through. You can't really allow that to happen even in a playoff game. So it was really funny because Wembanyama's looking at Harrison Barnes and he's like, "What does that mean?" And Harrison Barnes tells him, "Hey, basically you're ejected." You know, and so from then, the game really did change. The game stayed close throughout, and the Spurs even took more control of this game at a certain point, and we'll kind of get to that. But you could tell that after Wemby left, the Wolves' main objective was to get into the paint. Edwards was doing that in particular, getting up to 18 points at half. Randall seemed a bit more comfortable picking his spots too, although he did have 6 turnovers. But the thing about Randall, you know, with the way that he plays, he does like to dribble a lot. He likes to get into the lane. He likes to create angles for himself. He likes to get physical and body people. You can't really do that a lot with Wembanyama in the game, especially not in the paint. Even though Wembanyama is kind of more of a slimmer guy, you can't outmuscle him most of the time. So I think with Wembanyama getting out of this game, Randall just seemed to be a little bit more fluid. He seemed to be a little bit more comfortable picking his spots, and he was pretty consistent and efficient in this game. Of course, not going to be able to rely on that in the next game, but still, he was doing what he needed to do in that moment. Um, Now, the big story is obviously the second half, just because the Spurs, they came out with a lot of energy, honestly, more energy than the Wolves. They had more fire, they had more purpose, in the second half. And they just have like this stoicism about them and this focus that you see that is very particular and very evident in those teams that win championships and that just have a greatness to them. They aren't super flashy, but they are effective and focus on playing their parts as players. None of them are super flashy. None of them try to take over the game. They play within the flow of the offense, which is very Spurs like, right? We know the great Spurs teams. That's exactly how they played. Just a beautiful brand of basketball. They seem to take Wemby's ejection personally too. It was kind of funny. Wemby gets ejected. He daps up all of his teammates. He daps up the Spurs staff. And you kind of got the sense that he was pretty confident in his teammates and the performance of the roster after he leaves the game. And there was just quiet confidence in that moment. And for good reason. In the third quarter, Vassell and Harper, they led the way. And Harper, he had a hell of a game. In the first quarter, he had 9 off the bench, and that kind of set the tone for the rest of the game. He was displaying his versatile skill set, setting the tone. And you kind of just look at his toolkit. He has a really good spin move that he uses quite often. He has really good footwork. He has a really good sidestep, good shot timing. Just looking at the player and noticing that he's a rookie, you get the sense that he's going to be a great player for a long time because he's a fundamental guy. And as we know, guys who really work on the fundamentals and are locked in that aspect of the game typically last a lot longer than guys who just rely on their athleticism. And Harper's not the most athletic guy in the world. He's just a good ball player. Of course, you got some decent production from Fox as well. He was at least being the pressure point that he needed to be in the second half. But he wasn't super efficient. But overall, Harper finished with 24 points and 7 rebounds on 72% shooting. So that is a hell of a game. You got 20 from Castle, who's also a great two-way player. Ultimately, they played well, but they just couldn't get the shots to fall late, and that's kind of the difference. Looking at this Wolves team, rather, during that time that the Spurs were really playing well and hitting their shots in the third quarter, the Wolves started 4 of 17 during that stretch, and they were crushed by the Spurs' suffocating defense. Ant was really the only one playing with a sense of urgency, and you could tell he isn't as explosive or has the same range of motion. So having him drive as much as he was and, having him navigate the mid-range as much as he was, I didn't really see that as a recipe for success for them just because there was a lot of pressure on him and he's not completely 100%, despite his production, which makes it seem like he is. They doubled him, they surrounded him, they forced the rest of the team to produce, and it was clear that it was very hard for this team to establish a rhythm on offense. The ball wasn't really moving as much as it was supposed to. But all that being said, at a certain point, Shannon comes in, he hits back-to-back threes after going 0 for 6 to start, and then things started to kind of open up drastically for them. Ant started to get to his spots, and then, of course, down the stretch, 2 players that really made the big difference and kind of iced the game for them was Rudy Gobert and Dosunmu, the other ball handler that Chris Finch likes to use to take some pressure off of Anthony Edwards. Gobert, he comes in. I think the game is like 100 to 101 at this point. Gobert comes in, he scores an and one to put them up 3, and then Ant scores another bucket to put him up 4, and then Randall slices into the lane, throws an overhead pass to Gobert. Gobert throws it down emphatically. And the really interesting thing, again, is Gobert's presence, which is very important and very evident for this team. Gobert set the tone early, too. He came in, scored a quick 5, and he had 4 rebounds, a lot of those creating second chance points for the Wolves, right? So that signified his presence throughout this game, and it held true in the beginning and in the end. And of course, as we've seen before, his defensive presence is also a big thing that affects Wembanyama's game and prevents him from completely taking over games sometimes. The other player, Dosunmu, he came in once again being that extra ball handler for Chris Finch's offense. He comes in, he gets a huge and one layup. Then, this is kind of where the game gets interesting because he comes in, gets that huge and one. They're up by 5. But the Spurs play really exceptional defense in the half court, and they get the ball into Dosunmu. He commits a turnover. The Spurs get a bucket off of it, and that cuts it to 3. And then on the next possession, on the next inbound, they have trouble getting it in again. Finch calls a timeout. They eventually get the ball in bounds. Dosunmu hits 2 clutch free throws to put him up 5, and that was pretty much the game there. So the really interesting thing with Gobert and Dosunmu is that they kind of won the game for the Wolves in the end. Of course, Edwards was the guy who really sparked this team, drew doubles, kind of changed the flow of the offense, obviously scoring 16 of his 36 in the fourth quarter. But they got the production that they needed from their role players, and that was the difference because towards the end of the game, the Spurs kind of got cold. De'Aaron Fox couldn't really hit the shots that he usually would make, so that was the difference. And, good for the Wolves. They really needed to get this game, especially with Wembanyama being out. But kind of just looking at the future of this series, Wembanyama's going to come back. He's going to come back with a lot of force. They're going to be playing a home game. So it'll be interesting to see if the Wolves can start a little bit faster and if they can have more balanced offensive spurts, because I think they're going to need it in the next game. But they did what they needed to do. Anthony Edwards is still arguably the best player on the court outside of Wemby. And, they do have the pieces to win this series. So it'll be interesting to see the different adjustments that are made in the next game. But obviously, we're looking forward to the Knicks, who have advanced. They are waiting on the Cavs and the Pistons to finish their series. I think they're going to be matching up with the Pistons, but we'll see. It could end up being a very close series between the Cavs and the Pistons. Of course, the Thunder moving on over the Lakers. They're just waiting on this series to end. I think it'll be the Spurs, but once again, this series could go long as well. And it kind of just seems that the Knicks and the Thunder just have a growing advantage because these other teams are kind of in dogfights right now, and the Knicks and the Thunder are just kind of a cut above. They have better rosters. They have better overall defensive presence and offensive presence, and they get to rest more. So, I think that kind of bodes well for those two teams who might be on a collision course to the NBA Finals. But, we'll kind of leave it at that. That is my coverage of last night's games. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed watching this video, and we'll come back with more later.